All right. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Who's ready for another episode of Legends, Big Waves, and Epic Stories with Josh Palmer? Hopefully you are. We've got a great episode. This one's on probably the best surfer who ever lived. This footage is amazing, right? Tom Curren. Yeah, you ready to go? I don't know. I think I'm ready to watch a few more waves of Tom, and then let's get started. Back in the 1980s, when California surf culture was raw, fast, and a little dangerous, yeah, it used to be dangerous to be a photographer of surfing. You'd show up on the beach, a bunch of guys in black wetsuits would start flexing, like, hey homie, you better back off, especially at spots like Oxnard, Santa Cruz, all over California. The Lokes kept their spots under wraps, and if you were a photographer, you had to watch your back. Well, Jimmy MEYTKO had just moved from Texas. Maybe he didn't know all the rules yet, but he thought it'd be a good idea to follow around Tom Curren. Curren was about 16, 17 years old. Nobody knew he was going to be world champion. Oh wait, hold that. We all knew he was going to be world champion. The guy was unbelievable from day one. Sure, it didn't hurt that his dad, Pat Curren, was also a legend, and his mom, Janine Curren, another legend. She not only supported him, drove him around to different contests, she literally made his wetsuits, okay? Thanks, Mom. Anyways, so we got a killer show today. We're going to interview Jimmy MEYTKO, and we're going to be talking Tom Curren stories in the 80s. Oh yeah, and by the way, Jimmy MEYTKO is a great photographer. He could shoot anything and make it look good, but luckily for us, he decided to shoot surfing. Here we go. I'd like to thank Jimmy for coming on podcast. How do you pronounce your last name?
I grew up with it being pronounced any way you want, and I'm not one of those people that get upset when someone pronounces it wrong, but the correct way is MEYTKO.
Okay, awesome. Jimmy MEYTKO, and congratulations on this incredible book that you made here.
Thank you, Josh. It's been a lot of fun.
Tell me about the process of actually making it. Was it something that you wanted to do for a long time? And how long did it take for it actually to get copies in your hands?
Really good question. It actually, I did want to do it myself and self-publish it. And I have been wanting to do it for probably about 10 years. And I would get a certain amount of momentum going, and then other things in life would come into play, and I would put it on the back burner. And it wasn't until I connected with Rizzoli, I did that through Jamie Brisick, that I was put on a timeline that I had to adhere to, and then the support and knowledge. And through that, I was able to complete it. It probably took from start to finish close to when I actually had a copy in my hand. From when you start submitting your concepts to Rizzoli to when it's actually completed, probably 2 years. It's an arduous process. I wanted to quit many times. The hardest part, Josh, was editing and picking the images that were going to go into the book. Because for every image in the book, there's 100 images that were not picked, and each one of those images is kind of like your little babies. That especially the old imagery where there are slides and they're tangible and you hold them. It's not digital. It was a tough part. It was probably one of the hardest things I've done in photography was curate and narrow down the images cull them down for 305 pages, which seems like a lot of pages, but it ends up being, if you really did all the images you wanted to, it'd be like a 2,000 page book, and it'd be ridiculous.
It sounds like you might have a sequel coming up.
Well, who knows? Who knows if anybody? I've been doing a lot of shooting in the winter times, and I have a lot of really images from probably since 2017 till now. But and the surfers are phenomenal now. And
you moved to town.
I was 19. I actually came in the winter of of 1979, and I came to attend Brooks Institute photography school, which most people in 805, even though it's no longer around, know of it, but outside of 805 they may not know of Brooks. But it was premier photography school at that time, and it was quite a big deal. And I came out really with the sole purpose of shooting surfing and being one of the photographers for Surfer and surfing, and that was my goal, as long, with going to school. And I was going to be successful at that no matter what. I was a pretty determined kid, but I just had no idea what I was walking into. I don't think anybody did. I knew Tommy was there, and I had saw him the summer before, and watching him, it was in Texas where I was from, and watching him surf our waves at just another level, I realized that as good a surfer as I was in my own mind, I was never going to be, at that level. And so in my mind, what was the point? And I was already in photography, and I just kind of made that switch. It probably was happening for about a year or two, but after seeing Tommy, I was like, okay. And I'm a surfer. I've always been a surfer. Surfing's always been a big part of my life. But as far as, profile, as far as trying to contribute back to the sport of surfing, I saw that photography was the way to go. It certainly wasn't going to be my surfing. And so I knew of Tommy. And when I arrived, I did not know Tom. I didn't know anybody. And through certain situations, I got to know Sam and Matt George. I got to know Kim Robinson, who was the manager at Channel Islands. And from there, just started networking and closing in the gap of everybody. And in a very short amount of time, because everybody pretty much was trying to make a name for themselves and coming up and being a part of the surf scene, which was really centric down to Southern California. And so everybody was kind of in the same place as I was, trying to make a name for themselves and build up a reputation and be noticed by the magazines down south. So we all kind of fed off each other.
Take me through that. What was your first meeting like with Tommy?
I don't have a super clear. I remember seeing him surf for the first time in South Padre Island in Texas. I don't have this super clear image of the first time I met him. The first time I saw him surf in California was at Rincon. And I was going to school and was really trying to figure out the lay of the land. And I think Tommy was surfing Hammonds after school. And this is kind of funny. I didn't know how to get down to Hammonds. And I would drive to Butterfly Lane on really big days and look towards Hammonds. And then I'd drive around and I'd end up, below Hammonds and go, this could be Hammonds. It's not as big as I saw, from up on Butterfly, looking down from Butterfly Lane. And so it was actually months before I figured out how to get to Hammonds. So when I first got there, I probably could have shot a lot more of Tom if I knew how to get to Hammonds, as funny as that sounds now. But I think Sam and Matt knew Tom, Kim Robinson knew Tom, of course, with Channel Islands, and I think we just started seeing each other at the beach and got to know each other like all surfers do. And then Tommy didn't drive yet, so I started to drive him and the rest of the crew. There was a kid that Tom was best friends with back then that used to surf, Shane O'Farrell, and Tom's mom used to drive him everywhere, and still in the early 1980, 81, she still was driving to all the contests. But when there weren't contests, then we went and like on the weekends we would drive down south, whether it was, depending on time of year, Ventura, Malibu, or up north to Central Coast and stuff. And then after school we would my school was kind of different. It didn't get out at 3, but you kind of worked on your own, and you showed up to class for once a week, and they got your assignment and worked on it all week. But we kind of when Tom and Shane got out of school, we would go hit Rincon or wherever we thought the surf was good. And it kind of built from that. And we were both pretty driven. You know, he was driven just to go surf, and I was driven to take pictures. So it was a real, you know, symbiotic situation that worked out well.
Sounds like you guys had a lot of fun together. Do you have any like stories that stick out that might be kind of funny?
Oh, probably. I think probably the main takeaway is we were all young and we were all like excited to be like trying to Tommy build his surf career, me build my photography career, and we were pretty focused on that. And the whole time, we all had these goals, and we all helped each other with each goals. But like, you know, a group of any surfers, you know, sometimes it was just Tom and I shooting, sometimes it was Sam, Matt, Tom, and then everybody just grew. It was all fun. Everybody was having it. The main takeaway is everybody was just having a good time. And of course, you know, we got on each speaking the board of choice. But right, watching all that kind of happen, and I remember shooting Tommy on it. I don't really recall noticing the transition of Tommy's style from a twin to a thruster as it was happening, because he was just developing so rapidly. But looking back through the photos, how Tommy surfed on a twin and how he surfed on a thruster is very evident. His turns went very square, very explosive, as opposed to very smooth California twin fin style. The beauty about Tommy back down on twin fin is he was just so smooth, it can go anywhere on a wave so easily. But once you put the thruster underneath him, it just turned into power turning and square turns, and you see all, you know, and straight up slams off the lips, which were a little harder to do in twin fins. You just see all that through the imagery, and it's pretty exciting, you know, being a part of that.
You captured like not only the waves but the people. Like some of the photography of the people is just as good, if not, you know, better than the surfing.
I think that's a product of two things. I think it's a product of going to Brooks and having to focus on that a lot. And then the other one is, I think, like I said before, I was so stoked to be a part of what I used to only look at in the magazines. And now I'm here creating images for the magazines. Everywhere I turn my camera, I would shoot. And back then, a lot of the photographers would shoot the surf, but they would never turn around and shoot, you know, the other direction. And when the waves were flat, I would find, you know, things to go shoot that had to do with surfing. I mean, it's just like nonstop. I was like a kid in a candy store, you know, coming from Texas. In CUREN area, and it was a whole different world. C Street wasn't quite as bad, but it definitely was different. Back then in the fairgrounds, Grateful Dead would be playing there all the time. You could, you know, it was kind of like straight out of a 70s, you know, how you would imagine it to be. In the distance, you could hear Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead playing. The Hells Angels did the security for those shows. There was no gentrification to C Street. It was dirt parking lots, and you know, it's not like you went there felt threatened, but there was always an element that didn't want you there. They didn't, and it wasn't just being a photographer. They just didn't want colored wetsuits and bright boards and anybody who's trying to be a professional surfer. I think one interesting thing about Tom is everybody was so amazed by his talent that he got a pass surfing in a lot of the areas that they frowned on anybody, you know, as the phrase back then was going pro, in quotation marks. And he got a free pass, and by association I got a free pass a lot. And you know, places like the ranch, I didn't shoot. I shot a couple of times, so it was small Tommy, and I'm glad I did. And I put a few of those images in the book because it's kind of historical to young Tommy surfing the ranch. But for the most part, when I went to the ranch, I went to surf and saw, unbelievable ranch and never shot. Shell Islands, I never took photos, just out of respect to the area. And there were so many waves that you didn't have to through that era. It was just nonstop. Kind of compare it to this winter where it was an El Nino winter and there's some really big days. All those in between days when there wasn't surf, there was still good surf back then. It wouldn't have been as big as the big swell days, but it still would have been 6 feet and clean and perfect somewhere. And so it's like every time you said, okay, when I get off work, when I get through a school, whatever, I'm going to go surf, you put your board in your car and there were waves. And you weren't sitting around waiting for weeks. It was pretty good yesterday evening at Rincon.
Oh, did you shoot at Rincon yesterday?
No, I actually, Josh, I live outside of Austin. I just had a couple. It's a lot of people don't know that, and I had a couple of people text me saying, "Are you going to be at Rincon in the evening?" Yesterday they texted me, and I was like,
I thought it might be good. But hey, I want to get back to this idea. You kind of blew my mind, to be honest. Surfing C Street and being able to hear Jerry Garcia at the same time. I mean, come on.
Well, it's not like you're sitting there like you had the radio on full blast of your car. You could just hear the distance, strains of the Grateful Dead. Yeah, no, that was parking lots and you'd pull off the street, pull into a dirt parking lot and head out and go as far as you could. And if you wanted to, stables or whatever, you'd park and walk, and it just felt like a whole different place.
Yeah, you had to mind your P's and Q's too, because back then, if you pissed somebody off, they could punch you in the face, and it wasn't like you'd call the cops.
Yeah, one thing about me is I've always been kind of disarming because I'm not looking for that. You know how some guys, they get in trouble and they never say anything, but they just kind of have that attitude about them, like they want to get in trouble, if that makes sense.
Well, they have that like chip on their shoulder, you're saying.
Exactly. I always, to me, the last thing I wanted to do was get in an altercation with somebody. I wanted to shoot surf photos. And it's not to say that I didn't have people come up and say cameras aren't cool here. And give me. Strangely enough, most, as a photographer, as a filmer, a still photographer, you're sitting there looking through your viewfinder, seeing some of the best surfers do some of their best surfing. And more so than anybody could possibly see in social media or back in that era, in magazines and surfing. And it's kind of like we used to live back then before there was so much proliferation of video and film. You saw a new surf movie a few times a year at the most, and that was a big thing. And so here on a daily basis, I was watching a surf movie firsthand, front row seat. And when shooting from the water, you're really front row seat. And if you just, as a surfer, and just loving to see good surfing, that was probably was enough right there. Now, we want to have our stuff seen by everybody else. You shoot in order to share all this. You're not just doing it for your own hedonistic, gratification of watching great surfing, and you want to share it and show it to other people. And that, to me, that's a pretty exciting thing, So for me, with still images, I know you shoot more film. When somebody looks at what you shot, you're really proud to share it, and you're actually sharing something they wouldn't have seen otherwise, right? Most of the time. Especially back in the era that I was, there was that one of the big days back at the end of 2023, like the 30th of December or something, when Michael February was out and Connor and a lot of the Challenge Island guys were out. Every 10 feet was a photographer filming or shooting. So there's every ride, no exaggeration, probably had 30 people filming. Back in the early 80s, there definitely were other photographers. I don't think they were as focused on getting into magazines and being as prolific as I was. But most of the time when you're at the beach, you were the only one shooting. And there were no iPhones. I'd probably seen Al at the beach, probably talked to him, probably was part of a group hanging out in the Rincon parking lot afterwards, but really didn't know him. And I went to Kim and I said, I have to shoot this for, I can't remember if it was Surfer Magazine. Yeah, Art Brewer. And he goes, okay, I'll set it up for you. He goes, but you know that he does not like to shoot with anybody from Brooks, because I guess he was at that time, you're always looking for something to shoot. And the surfers in the past that went to Brooks said, well, I'll go shoot Al. And the other thing is this is before shaping machines or anything. Al was basically the shaping machine. So when you stopped him, you stopped production. And furthermore, the camera equipment, the sensitivity of the film didn't allow you to go in and shoot handheld without extra lighting in those dark black shaping bays. And so you had to have a strobe and you had to bounce it off the ceiling, and it wasn't automatic. You had to calculate the light fall off. So if you pointed the strobe at the ceiling, you had to calculate how far to the ceiling, how far from the ceiling to him, what the light fall off is, and then you had to set your strobe intensity and your corresponding settings on the camera. So this whole time, all this math is going through your head, and you're nervous, and you don't know what you're doing. You barely know what you're doing, and Al's just staring at you. And in your mind you're going, okay, I'm stopped. He's not shaping. He's going to have to work late to catch up for this time. And the funny thing about Al is every single time when you start shooting him, he kind of has that look, and then as he relaxes and warm up, and as you relax and warm up and you start shooting, it starts becoming fun. He starts laughing and gregarious, and it's a great experience. But it always kind of starts out with that deadpan look, where he's just looking at you like, hurry up. So, I was just a kid who didn't know what he was doing, and I got lucky and got a couple of shots that worked. And I had to send the roll of film undeveloped to the magazines, and it was a long time before I was in the office with Jeff Devine at Surfer, going through my file, just looking to see what they had saved, and that's the first time I saw the developed roll that I shot that time.
You didn't see the results.
Well, with black and white, you could develop it the same day and you can see results. I think the biggest difference between shooting film back then and digital is digital, you go out and you just capture millions and millions of bits of information, way more information than you need, and then you bring it back to your computer and you process it, and you determine where you do your own dodging and burning. You control a dynamic range that's 3 times as large. You get built into it is detail in the shadows and detail in the highlights. You don't have to worry about any of that. You decide whether it's black and white or color. Back in film, where you had about 3 stops of difference between your highlights and your shadows, you had to build that and put information into the shooting, and then what you got was what you had. So to put that more easier to understand terms, if you're not a photographer, if you're shooting somebody with the sun behind you, and the person in the front is going to be completely dark, you have to then either bounce light into them or have a strobe and put light into them in order for them to see the detail of them. Where in digital you don't have to. You can shoot somebody with the sun directly behind them, and the cameras are so incredible now that they'll capture detail and information in the shadow and in the bright sun behind. Did I say that where it made sense?
Yeah, you did. This shot of Al though, it almost looks biblical to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's the framing. Maybe it's knowing what his career turned out to be. But it's like, it literally looks like he's like the Jesus of surfing, holding the Holy Grail, which is like this surfboard, and he's got like the foam dust on his arms. He's shirtless. it's kind of an incredible image, I gotta say.
Can I say that battery packs in them? So often, like I remember we climbed up the cliffs above Rincon once. We didn't drive up, but we climbed up. There was about 4 or 5 of us to shoot a shot. And when I get up there, my strobe didn't work. The battery didn't work. So you can plug it in, but there's no plug up there. So you constantly had to deal with equipment issues like that, especially when you were having to bring light with the strobe into a situation like a shaping room. And just the anxiety of shooting shots like that, unless you did it every single day, and remember I was just learning, is tremendous. And even then I went on a shoot once with a guy who was a pro guy in LA about that time, and who complete command of his craft. He was sweating the whole time. That's just what photography was. I don't want to say photography now is easy. It's not, but there was a lot more to it. You know, now when you get into digital photography, and I think this is what I was leading to before when I forgot where I was going, is you end up spending like not just hours but days, like making something perfect on your computer, on your desktop. Whereas back then, when you shot that shot, you had to do all the work shooting the shot. Afterwards, you'd send it off to Kodak, or maybe if it was black and white, you spent some time dodging and burning in the darkroom. But you were limited as to what you could do. So basically, when you shot that shot, it was basically done. And in that sense, back then it was a lot easier. There's nothing more frustrating than to shoot 10,000 images on a really good day and then come back to your desktop and have an hour to go through them and then turn around and have to send them off, because you have to weed down 10,000 images to what the client needs, and then you have to process them yourself on the fly, all within an hour. And you know you're not doing as good as you need to. And if it's a personal thing, then you end, where you do it on your own time, then you're spending days on one photo, and that days you could be doing something else. So it's a give and take.
How's this show photo of Janine? You really captured her. I don't know. A lot of people don't know how critical she was in Tom's career.
Yeah, no. I don't want to say they're. It's just like with Al. Both Al and Tommy would have reached what they reached without each other, but that's not what happened. They did have their symbiotic relationship, and together, that is what happened, and they did great things. Well, same kind of thing with Janine. Would Tommy have still been a world champion without Janine? Probably, but the way it happened was, that's hard to say. I take that back. Maybe he wouldn't have been without Janine. But either way, she was probably the most, in my mind, what I saw firsthand, the most influential person within his life. Just, if nothing else, just being the kind of one of the first, type of surf moms that existed at that level. Not only, like when I first saw Tommy surf, she loaded up Joe and Anna and Tom and drove all the way to Texas. They drove to Texas when I saw him surf in the summer of 1979. And then the year before that, I think they drove, I was talking to Tommy's brother Joe CUREN. I think she did the same thing, drove all the way to Cape Hatteras for the U.S. the year before in 78. And so she was constantly driving Tommy up and down the coast for contests. When there wasn't a director for the WSA, because sometimes things special and he was winning, but you're putting a lot of energy and you don't know where it's going to go. It's easy to say, and we all did feel like Tommy was going to be a world champion, but if you're the person putting out the money for the events, for the travel and the hotel and the gas and the time, you don't know where it's going to go. The professional surfing wasn't a money sport when all this started. I think Tommy's first contract with OP and Rip Curl at that time was Landmark. But when all this started for them, if you think about it, it's not like, training to be, one of the top surfers. If all the surf companies today or, 5 years ago or 10 years ago thought you were the next big thing, all that energy they would put into you, that didn't exist back then. It was pretty much just out of, love and as a parent.
Yeah, no, she's incredible. Let me ask you a question here. You've got this beautiful backlit photo of George Greeno.
That's actually not George Greeno.
Okay, right. It says it's not George Greeno. It talks about the shortboard revolution in the late '60s. It's Paul Gross.
Yeah, equally as an interesting person. Well, the thing about Greeno at that time was every bit as much a surf star and kind of iconic as he is today. I mean, he was already there, dating back, to Picnic Board Revolution that we know about with McTavish and Net Young and all that. I mean, by that time, he was already an icon. And I didn't shoot him because right then in the early 80s, sailboarding was kind of coming into play. And at that time, a lot of surfers went into sailboarding, but there was kind of a schism. You either got into sailboarding or you hated it. And I was a surfer pure in and pure out. I did not want to be involved with sailboarding. And at that time, Greeno was experimenting with sailboarding. He wasn't surfing. He wasn't kneeboarding to be. And so I did not know Greeno, but I had good friends that were good friends of his, so I could easily connect with them. But I saw no need to. Looking back, I wish I would have. I mean, shots of him tinkering, making some of his sailboarding, on those channel wind days in the channel. I mean, I'd love to, looking back, have known that I photographed all that. But back then, that was like, no, that's the sailboarders are the enemy. That's kind of how the vision kind of played out. The one time that I saw him once at El Cap, and it was a really good El Cap, and it was in the parking lot, and he was just leaving, and I think David Pu'u and somebody back then. David Pu'u wasn't a photographer; he was a surfer, and David Pu'u and I forgot who else was out. So one of those other North County guys at that time, and the waves were really good. And he was just, when he was walking in, going to his car, he had a mat. So I missed. I would have loved to shoot him on a mat. I love mat surfing. I think it's insane how fast they go. As you know, there's a couple of guys at Rincon. One specific, I cannot think of his name. God, that's going to bother me. I can't think of his name. But that's my experience with Greeno. And Paul Gross at that time was definitely a Greeno aficionado, and that's that image of him. I wish it was Greeno. I wish I would have had, as a photographer, you like to kind of collect, like, oh, I shot him, oh, I shot that person, or I shot, Kim Merrick back in the day. And that's another person we haven't even touched on, is the simultaneous rise to being number one woman in the surf world. Kim, at the same time Tommy. Everything was kind of Kim and Tommy. It wasn't just Tommy alone, and it was kind of something I don't talk about enough. Is that when everybody was kind of in the middle of that rise and excited to be a part of it, it was the fact that both Tommy and Kim were going out there winning all these amateur contests and ultimately winning. Up the cliffs at Halama to try to get a better angle. This is long before you had drones and everything. And I was on the edge of the cliff, where one wrong move and I would fall down, 40 feet, whatever the distance is, to the rocks. And I set my camera and tripod up and turned around, or sitting down, perched, carefully twisted around to get my film. And as I came back around, my tripod started to lean over. And if I would have reached for it, I would have gone over too. So I had to let it fall. And it all just hit the rocks and exploded and everything. And so basically my camera was destroyed. Believe it or not, my lens, which was the standard lens of that time that you used, was a Century 650. It actually was sharper after. It was sharp already. It was even sharper after that. It had one little ding on it. And then my motor drive seemed fine. So I never worked with insurance companies. I had insurance through my father. I didn't really know the ins and out of it. And when the insurance guy was asking me, what do I need to replace? I said, well, my motor drive's fine. I just need a camera. Well, so then this was in January of '83. I got my new camera. My lens was fine. My motor drive seemed fine. So I started shooting. That's right when the El Nino swell started to hit. So I went through 13 rolls of film because it was all happening back to back so fast. I wasn't taking film in to get developed. So I wasn't seeing my results. I was just, as soon as I'd shoot, I'd put it up on this shelf in my room and I'd go shoot more. And I went through 13 rolls of some of the best sand spit of Tommy, Pitus, one of the absolute best days in the Cove at Rincon. To this day, I haven't seen a day come close to this. Santa Clara, just everything. And,
Okay, just because we haven't touched on Davey.
And I know where it's 6 to 8 feet going off right now. He goes, but we can't surf there. So because it was real localized. So he said, I'll take you there, but we can't bring our boards. So we went there, and by the time we got to Santa Clara, the wind had already come up a bit. And sure enough, it was 6 to 8 feet, just kegs going off. But it was windblown. There's nobody out. Well, that kind of not being able to surf there thing with Santa Clara kind of ended right about then, just coincidentally. And it pretty much from that point on was down at Hollywood, maybe Oxnard Shores a little bit, but Santa Clara pretty much became no man's land. And the first time, and I'll get to David Miller in a second, but the first time I talk about the Daydreams in the book with Willie Morris and Sam and Matt George and everything. That was the first time that I shot at Santa Clara, and then I would start going back to Santa Clara with Willie after that. And we never caught it like the Daydreams, but we got millions of days with Willie and Tommy, just an unbelievable surf there. Back then the sandbars were so much better because they would dredge the harbor. They would deposit all that clay muck on the beach, and then that would get out in the water and make the sandbars really abrupt and strong, and they'd last because they're a composite of not just sand that would move around after one strong swell, and they would stay there. And the river mouth was managed different. Somebody told me the power plant manages it now, and they do it different, so you don't get that one little stream, that you don't get the estuary building up where they had to burst open the sandbar and let that one little stream go out every so often, building this insane sandbar. It's all different now. So you don't have you have the ingredients, but you're not using it the same way they did back then. So with all that said, it was a whole different break back then. And since I've been shooting in 2017, I haven't shot there once since then. I've seen it where it had size. I've seen it where it's the only place that waves were hitting. They weren't hitting up down the coast, or they weren't hitting up in the Santa Barbara area, but they still didn't have the form and shape they had back in the old days. So we started to surf there. It was really good. Davey Miller was one of the first guys I ran into, and he was not pro at that point, and he did not like shooting on the beach. And that's one of the times Willie came up and I was telling you about earlier. But all within the course of the year, everything changed. And he completely, like got into getting photographed and being, published. And so I kind of shot him. I was able to shoot him. We weren't able to shoot much because I was always shooting with Tommy and he was in Ventura. But I did shoot him enough, and it was all part of this when he went to Hawaii and did that campaign at Pipeline and stuff, that was pretty phenomenal. So this all predates that campaign, his Hawaiian, what I would call his Hawaiian campaign a bit. On the really big days that I would shoot in Ventura, I was always down at Clara, and him and his crew were always up at C Street and stuff. The full air and landing had not been captured, and so working with Davey, the goal was to catch him doing it there and completing it. And and you would see photos in the magazines back then. And I talked to Jeff Devine about it once. They were putting photos that they knew the guy was flying in the air and was going to just come apart from his board midair and never had a chance of landing it. But they put it in the magazines to kind of get people, that helped the progression in the thinking. But there was a race, so to speak, like a space race, to get the completed, the landed air, and eventually Davey and I got it, and it was in at that time Surfer magazine, which was the end all of surfing. Surfer and Surfing magazine were, and Surfer had this section in their magazine called Tips, and it was a how to do a maneuver. And so the first completed air was of Davey, and it showed up in the Tips, and so that was pretty cool. But Davey was doing all kinds of things. I mean, freaky things. Things if I explained it to you, it doesn't even make sense. He had this one thing where he'd take off on a wave. He always had to wait for the right waves. I mean, he was trying to do. I have shots of him trying to do barrel rolls, and the physics of doing the maneuvers is hard enough. But first you have to find the right wave to be able to do it. But he had this one maneuver where he would tumble. He would take off and stand up on his board, grab his rail, and then tumble down the wave on his back and then back on his board and hit the bottom and then do a bottom turn.
What?
There's so many things I never caught on film that you're sitting there thinking like, okay, he's not going to do anything. Remember, you had to conserve film back then. You couldn't shoot anything using the air, and they're fairly crude airs. They weren't anything like what's being done now with the height and the twist and all the different type of airs you could do. It was basically just a basic air. I think the biggest thing that had to be learned back then that I didn't really understand is how to take off. You couldn't just take off like an off the lip and throw your board out like an off the lip back weighted on the tail and swing it back around, because you'd separate. You had to be more up on the nose or on top of your board. Now I've seen guys do it. I've seen guys do it like they're doing an off the lip. It's just the boards are so light and they're so quick, and it's so rehearsed and practiced now. But back then you had the trick to finally learning how to land air was to be on top of your board as you took off from and left the wave face. And so that all sounds pretty rudimentary, but back then, Davey was figuring it out, along with guys like Matt Keckley and Kevin Reeve for the first time. So that whole Davey, so being a photographer and shooting an area that basically was not really printed much except for Steve Bissell shots and several guys. Hugland was filming, and Don Balch and a few other guys were filming more lineup scenic shots, but then all of a sudden show up in an area that didn't have much more exposure in the magazines than that, and all of a sudden being at the beginning of shooting Tommy and the aerials with Davey, that was a pretty incredible thing, and it was incredible at the time. It's not like you look back and say it was incredible. It was pretty incredible as it was, the progression and how fast it was happening at that time. And I hope that comes across in the book. I hope you can see that in the book. And the fact that I was from Texas and I was even though I started surfing when I was 7, I had traveled around the world surfing, and I was a really good surfer. I still didn't understand how the surf world worked because, you're talking about being in the backwoods. Being a surfer at that time from Texas, you were really in the backwoods. You knew a lot about Mexico because that's where Texas surfers travel to get real waves. But you didn't know the surf industry and the surf scene, and you just saw it in the magazines and you filled in the spaces. And all of a sudden to be in the middle of all that, coming from such a deprived area of all that, really, made it where it was that much more of a mission for me to do and that much more exciting for me. And I hope that comes across in the book too.
It definitely does. And you captured a magical time. You were there during a magical time. You were shot on film, real film, which I think makes it even more special. And where's the best place to get this book? How do we get a signed copy of this bad boy?
The signed copy, you can order from me on my website. It's jimmymedicogallery.com. You can follow me on Instagram, jimmymedico.gallery. It's published by Rizzoli. Rizzoli's a great big, cool publishing company, and they are on all the platforms.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it.
You can tell once I get going, I start talking too much, and you got to shut me up. But I appreciate listening and allowing me the opportunity.
Cool, man. Well, thanks again.
Hey, Josh, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing you.